It was July 9th, 1999, when everything changed for Tiffany McInness. She was 15 years old at an age where your mother is supposed to be more than just a parent. She's your best friend, your confidant, the one person who always has your back. For Tiffany, that person was Kim Langwell. They had a bond that went deeper than the typical mother-daughter relationship. Kim was young, fun, and devoted. She made her daughter feel safe and loved in a way that made them inseparable. That evening, Kim called Tiffany to confirm their dinner plans. It was a routine conversation, the kind that happens hundreds of times in families across the country. They would eat together, talk about their day, and be present with each other. It was what they did, but Kim never showed up. The phone went silent. The hours passed, and Tiffany's concern shifted into panic. She called her mother's phone again and again. Nothing. No answer. No message. Just silence. What Tiffany didn't know in those first desperate hours was that her mother had vanished. The next morning, authorities found Kim's car parked in a strip mall parking lot near an Eert pharmacy. The vehicle was locked. Inside, they discovered her briefcase, her personal belongings, but her purse was gone. Her wallet was gone. Her keys were gone. Detective Joe Ball arrived at the scene and looked at what he had to work with. No blood on the pavement, no signs of struggle, no witnesses who could say what happened in those moments between Kim's last phone call and the discovery of her abandoned car. Kim Langwell had simply walked away, or she had been taken. Either way, she was gone. For a 15-year-old girl, losing your mother isn't just about losing a parent. It's about losing your stability, your safe place, your reason for getting out of bed in the morning. Tiffany faced that loss with a courage that no teenager should ever have to find. In the first year after Kim disappeared, she tried to hold herself together, she tried to function, but as the months turned into years with no answers, no closure, no body, the emotional weight became unbearable. She began to fall apart. Her world had shattered, and nobody could put it back together. Throughout all of this, Aunt Susan refused to let the case go cold. She organized searches. She kept pressure on the investigation. She refused to let people forget about Kim Langwell. And family friends like Esther Randall, who everyone called Mimi, kept Kim's memory alive by sharing stories about who she really was. They talked about her warmth, her humor, the way she could light up a room just by walking into it. Everyone who knew Kim spoke about how she loved her daughter fiercely. This was not a woman who would simply abandon her child. This was not a woman who would disappear by choice. But the investigation had hit a wall. Detective Ball had suspects. He had questions. But he didn't have evidence. He didn't have answers. The case file grew thicker with each dead end, each interview that led nowhere, each theory that crumbled under scrutiny. And as the years passed, Detective Ball retired, carrying the weight of Kim's disappearance with him. He had failed to bring Kim home. He had failed to give Tiffany the answers she deserved. That failure haunted him through his retirement, a ghost that wouldn't let him rest. Tiffany grew up without her mother. She survived the loss, but survival wasn't the same as healing. She lived with questions that had no answers. She lived with a grief that never fully disappeared. And she lived with the determination that one day, somehow, someone would find out what happened to Kim Langwell. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The investigation into Kim's disappearance revealed a complex web of relationships, each one raising new questions. 3 men had been in Kim's life at or around the time she vanished, and each one became a focus of Detective Ball's scrutiny. Ken Weatherford was Kim's boyfriend at the time of her disappearance. They had met at the mobile chemical plant where Kim worked and had been dating for about 6 months. By all accounts, things seemed to be going well between them. They had even taken a trip together to Cozumel, Mexico, suggesting a relationship that was progressing positively. But Ken's behavior on the day Kim disappeared raised red flags. He was the one who discovered Kim's abandoned car in the parking lot. However, instead of immediately reporting it, he waited until the next day. That delay troubled Detective Ball. What was Ken doing during those lost hours? What was he hiding? The questions lingered, but without concrete evidence, Ken remained a person of interest rather than a confirmed suspect. Then there was Frank McCormick, a supervisor at Kim's workplace. Frank's behavior toward Kim went far beyond normal workplace interaction. He had developed an intense, obsessive fixation on her. He showed up at their home frequently, bringing gifts, inserting himself into Kim's personal life in ways that made her deeply uncomfortable. The gifts kept coming. The visits kept happening. And then there were the love letters, an 1.5-inch stack of written correspondence expressing his feelings for Kim. But it got worse. Frank had created photo collages, images where he had digitally placed Kim's face onto the bodies of other women. When Kim discovered these disturbing creations, she became frightened. She knew his behavior was escalating, becoming more unhinged. She wanted to report him, but fear held her back. She worried about retaliation, about what he might do if she formally accused him. When investigators questioned Frank, he provided an alibi. He claimed he was at a grocery store buying supplies for a poker game on the evening Kim disappeared. A receipt confirmed it. Without evidence placing him at the scene, investigators moved on. Frank McCormick was ruled out, despite the deeply disturbing pattern of his obsessive behavior. But it was Terry Rose who captured Detective Ball's full attention. Terry had been in a relationship with Kim for 6 years. They had lived together before breaking up, but even after the relationship ended, they maintained contact. They stayed friendly, or so it seemed on the surface. On the evening of July 9th, Kim stopped by Terry's house. He claimed she had come to help him hang boards in the house, some kind of renovation project. Kim arrived around 5:10 or 5:15 in the evening, stayed briefly, and then left to meet Tiffany for dinner. That was Terry's account. But Detective Ball listened to Terry's words and watched his body language, and something felt wrong. The way Terry described the evening was vague. His tone suggested dishonesty. The detective's instinct, honed by years of experience, told him that Terry Rose was lying. The police searched Terry's house, hoping to find some trace of Kim, some piece of evidence that would place her there under circumstances other than what Terry had described. The house was cluttered and disorganized, filled with accumulated items and clutter. But there was no visible sign of Kim. There was no evidence of violence, no blood, nothing that screamed foul play. Still, Detective Ball remained convinced. When Terry Rose agreed to take a polygraph test, the results came back conclusive. He failed. The needle on the machine had detected deception. Terry Rose was lying about something, but without physical evidence, without a body, without anything concrete to tie him to a crime, Detective Ball had no way to move forward. He was frustrated. He was convinced. But conviction was not enough. He needed proof, and proof was something he didn't have. The spring of 2023 brought new hope to a case that had sat dormant for nearly a quarter century. Investigators decided to reopen Kim Langwell's disappearance. It was time to take another look, to challenge the old assumptions, to see if fresh eyes could find what the original investigation had missed. Supervisors were briefed on the decision. The goal was simple but profound: get answers for the family, particularly for Tiffany, who had lived with questions her entire adult life. When detectives reviewed the original statements from 1999, inconsistencies jumped out at them. People had not been completely truthful in their accounts. The vagueness that Detective Ball had sensed in Terry Rose's explanation now seemed even more suspicious upon review. Other statements had contradictions that had been overlooked or downplayed decades earlier. It became clear that the original investigation, thorough as it was, had been hampered by the lack of physical evidence. Without DNA, without a body, without crime scene analysis, investigators had been forced to work with interviews and circumstantial details. Sometimes the truth gets buried under layers of confusion and time. The decision was made to bring in specialized resources. Texas EquuSearch, an organization founded by Tim Miller, stepped in to assist. These were people who had dedicated their lives to finding missing persons. They had expertise that local law enforcement, despite their best efforts, sometimes lacked. They had resources, equipment, and most importantly, experience in locating remains that had been hidden for years. Collaboration between family, law enforcement, and this specialized organization proved to be the turning point. The searches began. Teams combed through terrain that had been searched before, but never thoroughly enough. They looked in places where remains might have been deliberately hidden, where decomposition and the elements might have destroyed evidence over 2 decades. And then, in a location that previous investigations had somehow overlooked or dismissed, they found something. What they discovered was one of the most disturbing scenes that veteran law enforcement officers had encountered in their careers: a hidden grave, concealed deliberately, containing the remains of Kim Langwell. The identification confirmed what Detective Ball had always suspected. Kim was dead. She had been buried in that hidden grave for nearly 24 years. The physical evidence that had been missing all those years had finally been recovered. It was not enough to prove guilt in court, perhaps, but it was enough to confirm what the family had feared all along. Their worst nightmare had come true. Detective Joe Ball, now retired, received word of the discovery. The case that had haunted him through his retirement suddenly had a conclusion. Kim had been found. The family would finally have answers. But for Ball, the relief was mixed with a deep sense of failure. He had carried this case with him for decades, unable to solve it during his active years, unable to bring Kim home when it might have mattered, when closure could have come sooner. He had retired with unfinished business, and though the case was now resolved, the weight of those lost years remained. Tiffany McInness, now an adult who had survived her mother's disappearance and built a life despite that profound loss, finally had answers. She knew what had happened. She could stop wondering. She could stop hoping for a miracle that would never come. But the knowledge brought no joy. It only confirmed the gravity of what she had always feared. From the tragedy of Kim's death emerged a hard-won wisdom. Tiffany spoke about the importance of fighting for loved ones, of listening when someone expresses fear about another person in their life. She spoke about the dangers of allowing obsessive, controlling, violent people into one's world. She wished she had fought harder for her mother's safety, had recognized the danger Terry Rose posed, had done more to protect the one person she loved most. but she was a child then, and the responsibility was not hers to bear. Kim Langwell's case became a cautionary tale. It illustrated the devastating consequences of domestic abuse, of obsessive behavior, of the failure to take threats seriously. It showed how easily a life could be erased, how completely a person could vanish, and how long the search for truth could take.